you used to work at Area 51.
Well, we want to be accurate.
Okay.
Area S4.
S4. Okay.
It's about 15 miles south of Area 51. Before that, I had worked at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico.
And you were involved in what kind of work?
Nuclear weapon development, physics. I mean, they do everything there.
So how do they approach you to say, hey, Bob, why don't you come on out to the Nevada desert?
Well, the way this went down was, at that time, it was 1982, I'd put a jet engine in my Honda. Los Alamos put it on the front page of the paper. Los Alamos man, physicist at the lab, built this 200-mile-an-hour Honda jet car that I drove to work every day. The day that came out on the front page of the paper was the day Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, was giving a lecture down there at the lab. I went down there early, and Ed Teller was outside, leaning on a brick wall there and reading the front page of the paper. Now, this is a guy out of history, so I introduced myself. Hey, I'm the guy you're reading about there. And we talked for a little while, and it was cool. Fast forward to years later, I had moved out to Las Vegas and had, left Los Alamos and, went on to other things, and I wanted to get back into the scientific community. I sent resumes out, and one of them went out to Ed Teller and referenced our meeting. He remembered me and gave me a reference, somebody to contact at EG&G. And that's pretty much how it started. Went down for an interview probably a couple times, and it was down at EG&G Special Projects, which was at McCarran Airport at that time out in Las Vegas.
And did they give you any sort of job description of what you were applying for?
I think it was advanced propulsion or something like that, something relatively generic, and they said it's in a remote area, some days on, some days off. It was kind of not exactly a full-time job, but you might have to be out there for 2 weeks at a time and take 2 weeks off. So it was kind of the work schedule would be kind of broken up.
So take me back to first day on the job.
The first day, I didn't really get to see a whole lot. The first day was essentially just paperwork. That's when I flew into Area 51 proper.
When did things get weird?
The first inkling I had was when I came in. There's this facility that is at S4. It's in the side of a mountain. And normally we had pulled in with the bus and gone around the front through a normal double door. This time that I went in, there were hangar doors open. I went in through the hangar door, and in the hangar door was the disc, the flying saucer that I worked on. I saw it sitting there, and we walked by it. It had a little American flag stuck on the side, and I thought, oh my God, this finally explains all the flying saucer stories. This is just an advanced fighter. And this is fucking hilarious. I went by, I slid my hand alongside it. I got reprimanded immediately for touching the thing. And there was a guy, an armed guard, that followed us in and just said, keep your eyes forward and your hands at your side and just walk in the door. So that was the first time I had seen anything that was weird. It was some time later that I was introduced to my lab partner, Barry, and we had some of the subcomponents of the craft in the lab. Barry was very anxious to get a new lab partner, so he was very talkative and couldn't wait to show me different things. And it was in the demonstration of the reactor working where it caught my attention to where this is technology that doesn't even exist. I mean, that was the first time I knew that this is really something different.
What was it?
This was a small reactor about the size of a hemisphere, about the size of a basketball, on a metal plate. And when it was running, it produced a gravitational field of its own. Now, this is something that we can't do. We can't produce any gravity. The only way we get gravity is from large quantities of mass. But there's no machine we can have that turns on that makes gravity. Like, you can turn on an electromagnet and it makes a magnetic field. We can't make a gravitational field. Anyway, this device was producing that. And Barry said, almost like he was bragging, go ahead, try and touch the sphere. And I couldn't. It pushed my hands away, just like two like poles of a magnet. The closer you put them, the more they push.
But and you felt that physically with
my
your hand?
Yeah. Now there's nothing that does that.
How did they turn it on?
The reactor?
Yeah.
The reactor can be turned on or turned off in a lot of different ways. The way Barry showed me it, the hemisphere is removed. There's a small tower in the middle. When you put the hemisphere on, the reactor activates. The reactor shuts down. It's load sensing. So if there's no load on the reactor at all, it shuts down. When there's a load present on it, it starts up again.
Load meaning?
You can consider it an electrical load, although it doesn't necessarily operate electrically. There's no wiring that connects any of the subcomponents together whatsoever. They just have to be in the immediate vicinity.
The way this reactor worked and that these things were not really connected.
No, nothing is connected. There's no wiring at all.
That freaks me the fuck out.
The stuff is borderline magic.
So there's a plate, there's this thing that looks like a half a basketball, and when it's on, you can't come anywhere near it. You can't touch it.
Right.
What is gravity about that? Like the concept of gravity to most people is gravity is bringing something towards it.
Right. Well, I guess you would say it's anti-gravity. It's gravity shifted 180 degrees. It's, anti-gravity.
Did they have any understanding about what could possibly create this effect?
They knew there was a fuel source in it, and they were proficient at making it work. And again, my analogy to something like this is you can drop a motorcycle off in the wagon train days and just leave it with the keys parked outside, somebody's place. Everybody will come around it and they'll poke and prod, and eventually they'll turn the key, get it to start, and become proficient at riding it. But they won't be able to understand what the hell's going on. They won't be able to make the plastic fender, much less anything else. And I think that's exactly the state we were at. We played around with the parts long enough before I got there where they could make the reactor operate, take the fuel out, and know that it makes it work. How exactly what was going on in the reactor remained a mystery at the time. I don't think anybody really knew anything. They could just watch what was going on and make note of it.
How long were you there?
I'd say about 6 months or so.
And what progress was made while you were there?
Well, we came up with a bunch of reasonably good ideas about how the reactor worked. And one of them was the square base of it was essentially like a cyclotron, which is a small particle accelerator, a circular one. Particle accelerators, linear particle accelerators, are just a, long tube essentially, and they accelerate particles with high voltage and, radio frequencies till they reach high speeds. But a cyclotron does that in a small circular area. And there's this very heavy element fuel, element 115, something that wasn't on our periodic charts at the time.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
When did it become on the periodic table now, the way the charts now?
I don't remember. Do you remember when they...
2004, Darmstadt, Germany, I think, is where they first fabricated 4 atoms. They lasted 220 milliseconds with the atoms. It's nothing, right? And then it later was discovered a couple more times they could fabricate it. Then they gave it a place then on the periodic chart. After that, called it moscovium.
So they told you about this stuff in 1982?
Yeah, well,
No,
we
not
kind of...
1982.
What year was this?
It was 88 and 89 when I was there.
Oh, okay.
82 is when
82 was
I
when
was
you
at
were at
Los Alamos.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So 88, 89, they told you about this stuff. So this was not like...
No, they didn't tell me about it. That's one of the things that this group came up with.
This element 115 was the fuel.
Yeah, it was the fuel.
There's been a bunch of people that called bullshit on many of the things that you've said, but over time, many of the things that you talked about, even in the 80s, have proven to be true. Element 115 was one of them.
Right.
At the time, you having a firm knowledge of the periodic chart and knowing what was real and what wasn't real, what was your reaction to having this stable element 115 that wasn't even supposed to exist?
Well, everything was impossible.
Right.
I mean, down to the metal. I did get a chance to look inside the craft on only one occasion. And this was important because where the reactor sat might have been critical to how it operated, since everything operates without any interconnection, so the placement of components might be critical. So they allowed me to go inside and look at it.
But you're going into this craft, and what are you thinking when you're inside of it? Like, what are you seeing?
It's a very ominous feeling because there are no, first of all, everything is one color. It's like a dark pewter color, and there are no right angles anywhere. It's as if somebody took, I've said this before, somebody took a model and fashioned it out of wax and then heated it just for a short time so everything melted. Everything looks like it's fused together. Everything has a radius of curvature where 2 items meet. It's a really weird looking thing. There was almost nothing other than a small foldable hatchway that looked recognizable. Everything was was really unworldly, to pick on it, a way to describe it.
So you get inside this thing, and it's designed for something that's much smaller than a human being.
Yeah, you can't really stand up till you get to the very center of it.
And how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
And what do you think this was designed for?
I'd say something close to half my height.
Wow. So these little 3-foot tallish creatures.
Yeah, and the seats were small too. I mean, obviously it was made, for something small. But there was no, there's nothing else in there. There's just seats, the reactor, and some of the subcomponents. There's no control panels. There's no bathroom. There's no decorative components or artwork or anything that you would recognize or trim. I mean, it's just a very bare bones thing.
You're not seeing any screens?
Well, there are archways around it that are part of the superstructure, and that one of the archways can become transparent. When I was in there was another group working on one of the archways, and you could call that a screen, more or less.
So through that archway, it would maintain the solidity, the solid, whatever metal it was.
Yeah.
But you could see through it?
Yeah, it just became transparent. Yeah. I saw that happen once or twice before I left.
Did you ask any questions about what the fuck that
No,
was?
there's no asking questions.
There's no asking questions.
No. And I don't know if the craft is made of, an advanced metal or a ceramic. It was cold to the touch, so, I would lean more towards a metal.
You're not allowed to ask questions.
No. They work on the buddy system, so I can only exchange ideas and talk to Barry. Now, this really interferes with science, because science is based on free discussion. And ideally, you get a bunch of guys together, exchange ideas, work on problems, and that's how things move forward. But they're so over-the-top concerned about security, they split everything off, and everybody becomes stagnant. It just destroys any of the progress you can make, or at least makes it go so slow. I think they wind up shooting themselves in the foot.
Which is probably why they arrived at this bottleneck, that they needed to get this madman with a jet-powered Honda to come in and see what he could do.
I think that was an act of desperation. I think they wanted someone that thinks out of the box, and let's just give this guy a try here, because they weren't, and they might have done this 4 more times since, up to the point in time today, assuming they're still working on this thing.
And when you see this craft and you're inside, was there any indication that there was an area that they would use to control it, to pilot it? Was there a pilot seat? There were 3 seats. They sat around. The reactor was in the dead center of it, and then equidistant around there were 3 seats. That's all. There was a large. They're not consoles. They're large rectangular objects, also spaced equidistant around the center. There's nothing on them. There's no buttons. There's no lights. There's no controls. Look the same color, the same
Everything
thing.
is the same
it's
color.
It's just a different shape.
Right. And directly underneath them, there's 3 levels in the craft. The main level is what we're talking about. Directly under that, those are the gravity amplifiers, the big rectangular objects. Underneath them are the gravity emitters that look like, for lack of a better word, a trash can hanging on a pipe. 3 of those. And then the top layer, this is just my personal belief, I think that has to do with a navigation or their version of a computer with some planar panels, sensor panels around the craft that we would call portholes, but they're not portholes. They're just black areas. And I think that just determines its position in space. But I physically was in the center section, and I stuck my torso in the bottom section and hung upside down so I could see how the gravity amplifiers were positioned.
What is the roughly the size of this thing?
I don't remember from being there, but after all this stuff was over, I had John Andrews, a guy from the Testers Model Corporation, and we sat down and tried to figure out from what I saw and known sizes of things, and we came up with 52 feet in diameter. And
so
I think that's
fairly small.
Yeah, so I think that's a reasonable guess. It violated a lot of what we thought was impossible to violate. I mean, one of the first laws of thermodynamics, essentially any machine, any device that operates always makes extra heat. Nothing works at 100% efficient. Even the headphones you're wearing, anything that takes power, some of that power is going to be converted to heat, and it's just wasted. This didn't. I mean, we looked at, back then we had infrared cameras. They're different today, but back then you had to pour liquid nitrogen into the camera to cool the sensor down and get these infrared images you've seen. But it never got, no matter what the load was on the reactor, it never got above the ambient temperature, which is impossible. I mean, you're, pulling out huge amounts of power and nothing ever gets warm. We tried measuring magnetic fields, and there was nothing there. So we started playing around with the emission from the emitters, the gravity wave itself, and saw what we could do with it and how it was focused. So we really spent all our time just trying to see what the stuff can do and what we can control.
So you were seeing what it could do, but you couldn't ever figure out how it was doing it.
No, not really. I mean, we really could only use or come up with a best guess. Now, I can't say we really that I could absolutely state for certainty how anything actually worked.
What is your life like from that moment on? Is that where everything changes? I would imagine the moment you actually make contact with something that's extraterrestrial, whether it's an object or a being, something where you can actually absolutely be certain it's not from here, your whole paradigm, the whole world you live in, is now a different place.
Well, this is the only time it became exciting. The rest of the time, it was really an ominous feeling being at work. But at that time, it was exciting. I mean, now I knew we were on the absolute beyond the cutting edge of science. And I was so absolutely excited to be there every single time I was. However, in short order, it began to concern me. We really have no idea what we're talking about. The excitement kind of turned to dread at some point because the amount of power we're dealing with is astronomical. I mean, to affect gravity, to produce the effects like this equipment does, takes huge amounts of power. And I've given the example before of taking a small portable nuclear reactor and, putting it back into Victorian times, with the scientists of the time, and just dropping it in a room. And they come and look at it and see that it's producing power and wonder how it works. So they start taking it apart. And as soon as they get some of the shielding off, the people are going to drop dead because of the radiation inside. Now, the people have no idea that radiation even exists back then. But anybody that comes in to check on them will also drop dead. There's no reason that exact scenario couldn't happen with what we're dealing with. We have no idea how the physics operate within this thing. The power levels are, like I said, astronomical. It's incredibly dangerous to tinker with something like that. In some respects, we were guinea pigs, just try to find out how to make this thing.
As far as you surmised, they had a series of different scientists try to back engineer this thing.
This project was to back engineer the alien craft. Specifically, it was to try and back engineer and see if we can duplicate the technology with available materials. Now, to do this, they split the project into many different pieces for several reasons. They do this on all classified projects, so nobody has the complete story. They compartmentalize everything. Now, we had the power and propulsion system. The briefings they gave me were like a 1 or 2 page overview of some of the other projects that were going on on the craft. The only reason they do that is just in case what you're working on is connected intimately in some way that we don't know of to one of the other projects. You have to know their existence.
So when you were reading that, before you actually saw the reactor, what were your thoughts on what they were describing?
I didn't know at the time. I mean, I was reading, I thought, is this some kind of test?
See if you're crazy?
Well, not to see if I'm crazy, to... a lot of times they'll take in real high security jobs. I mean, they'll intentionally insert nonsense into them, whether it's to confuse the fact or if for someone was to leak it out, they would carry that information along and know where it came from. So I read through the documents, but, I didn't know if this was, part of some kind of test. I mean, I really didn't consider it being all that possible as far as being the actual thing that I was going to work on it.
So there was no progress made.
There was some progress. I mean, we did identify, at least we think, some processes and had a rough idea, we think, of what was going on. But I think this is a problem that they've had for a long time. I was replacing somebody that Barry worked with prior to me, and I think there was some horrific accident that I didn't have a whole lot of information on, but, Barry alluded to that.
A horrific accident, like where someone died, or?
Yeah, where somebody died.
Because they were trying to tamper with things or figure out how something worked?
Yeah, the reactor in particular.
But yet he let you touch it.
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do was cut into one.
Oh,
now,
Jesus.
they had more than one there, and that was supposedly there was an unannounced nuclear test. That's what it was. At the time, remember, they were still doing underground nuclear tests at the test site. But from what I understand, according to Barry, there was an attempt made. Now, this must have been a pretty desperate attempt because it's not a very scientific process to analyze something that way. But it looked like they used a plasma cutter or something like that to cut into an operating reactor.
Only thing he saw in the craft, if we were considering Bob's story, the only thing that he saw in the craft that he related to that looked like a human could make was this honeycomb hatch. And I always love that because you're like obsessed with this thing that you could recognize.
I only focus on that because it was the one thing that I understood how it worked.
What was it?
And it was the access to the level below. And it was, if you take, you have a 6-pack of beer and you take out the cardboard dividers, set it on the table, you can put a lot of pressure on the top. But if you push it from the sides, it collapses flat. So it was something like that in a honeycomb shape that was essentially some sort of sheet metal. And you could walk on that in the upper layer, but if you took the corner, stuck your finger in, and pushed, it collapsed and made an entryway. So I thought that was a really unique. I'd never seen that before, and it was the only thing in the craft that made absolute sense to me. I said, we can make that, and all that is a hatchway.
Was there any discussion about the materials that were used to make the craft?
I'm sure there was, but that was the metallurgy division. It had nothing to do with us.
So you never got
not even the slightest briefing. I don't even know if it was metal or it was ceramic. I think there's a fine line between the two.
How many of these things did they have?
They had nine craft altogether. I only got hands-on with one of them.
Did you see the other ones?
Yeah. At one time, and only one time, the bay doors that between the hangars were all open, and I could see all the way through.
Were they all exactly the same?
No, they were all different.
Different shapes?
Yeah.
But they were all from somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely.
How were they different?
They looked completely different. One looked like I called it Jell-O mold, and it looked like a classic Jell-O mold with the rippled sides to it. One was a very flat disc, like like a straw hat or something like that. That was sitting up on its edge, and the thin part of it looked like a projectile had been fired through the edge of it. So I don't know if they were attempting to see if the metal could be penetrated, or if that's where the thing came from. Maybe it was shot down. But that was the only one where I saw there was, actual physical damage to it.
And that one was roughly the same size? They
were kind of too far away to tell.
And there was several teams that were working on the propulsion system, so there was different teams that were working on these different aircrafts?
I don't know. I could only assume.
Right. Did anyone make any attempt to explain or to tell you where they came from?
No. No one is the least bit interested in letting everybody know all the facts. They want to give you the minimum information that's necessary to complete your task. So you're not getting the story of where they came from. You're not getting the story of how much progress other people are making. You just focus on the small component.
But they gave you some indication that they've been working on these for a while?
Yeah.
But they never told you where it was from. They never let you ask questions about where it's from.
Well, if the information I read in the briefings was accurate, now what I do have to say is the information that pertained directly to the reactor was accurate. What I read did jive with reality in terms of how it was made, what we saw, how it operated, the materials, how it, turned on, and what was discovered about it. There was some paperwork that indicated that this was from the Zeta Reticuli star system. Yeah. Now, how they obtained that, I haven't the slightest idea. But it wasn't just from the Zeta Reticuli star system. It was what they called ZR3. So it was a third planet in that star system. There was no other information about it. Now, is that true? I don't know. I have no way of verifying that. But that was printed in the same materials that referenced the reactor. Now, I looked that stuff up when I went home. And Zeta Reticuli is a binary star. Two stars that orbit one another, and it's only visible in the southern hemisphere, and it's about 30 some odd light years away. So that's literally all the information I have about that. I don't know how they found out it came from there.
And you also probably have some suspicions that they give you some disinformation like you were talking about before. I mean, if you ever decided to talk about this, they added a bunch of nonsense to make whatever is factual look ridiculous.
Or be able to trace it down. Like, hey, this fax came out, and, this Lazar guy said it came from Zeta Reticuli, so they knew it would
when
be
you
me.
read Zeta Reticuli, were you like, what in the fuck is this?
Well, reading all of the stuff, it was, what in the fuck is this?
You're like, why did I sign up for this? Like, what?
No, to me, this was cool. This was interesting. I said, I was just excited to be out in a secure area, in the middle of the desert. I said, this is awesome.
How old were you at the time?
I was in my 20s. This was great. I mean, I was excited. So I didn't care. I reading through everything and.
So do you remember the thought process when you read that it's from Zeta Reticuli?
Yeah, it didn't hit me like a ton of bricks or anything. It was just like, yeah, okay. And,
you think it was bullshit?
I don't know.
You just were like, okay.
Now I don't. I mean, because when I read it, I hadn't verified anything, and this was just a bunch of stuff I was reading, and I thought maybe after this they're just going to give me a test and see what I can remember in crazy information, and it would. But like I said, when I finally went in with Barry, and had hands-on experience with what they were talking about, it took on a completely different meaning.
Have you ever asked anyone that has any inkling of any idea of where they got them or how they got them?
No, but something must have been said to me from Barry, but it was just too long ago, and I can't quite remember what was said, but it just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Whoa.
So that means it's not just old, it's ancient.
Now, how did you know at all how they were piloting it? Because they were doing some tests where they were having these things fly around in the sky, and this is what gets us deeper into your story.
The way the craft that we worked on flies is it doesn't fly like a conventional aircraft does, and it doesn't fly like a flying saucer would in a 1950s movie. It flies belly first. I mean, it may set down conventionally, but it always rotates. It does a roll maneuver, puts its belly towards the target, and then moves away at high speed.
So it'd be like a car flying with the wheels forward.
Right. I mean, it may land on the wheels, but at some point when it wants to leave, flips up, points the wheels where it wants to go, and takes off. And the gimbal video, you can see the craft do the roll maneuver. And it's really interesting. It behaves exactly like the crafts that I worked on.
So much like we have different shaped aircrafts and fighter jets and cars, they probably have different shapes of these objects that operate under similar principles.
Right,
perhaps.
But they all have the same power source.
They all have the same power source.
I was out there for one test, right? In fact, I was with Barry in the lab, and Dennis came in and said, we're about to run a test. Why don't you guys come out? Or I think he said, Barry, why don't you come out here and bring Bob with you? We went out there, and the craft was already outside the hangar and was just preparing to lift off. Now, they were in communication with somebody in the craft.
So there was a person in the craft?
Yeah, there was certainly a person in there. Now, it's not a comfortable place to be in because it's small. So the guy has to be sitting on the floor in the middle, my best guess.
And this is the same specific craft that you
Yeah,
worked
that
on
was-
because that was the only craft that you were in.
The only one that I touched and worked on. And it quietly lifted off the ground, which was incredibly impressive to see.
Quietly or silently?
Well, quietly, because
Did it make some sort of a noise?
It produced a little corona discharge from the bottom. A corona discharge is kind of a high voltage brush, little bluish glow discharge. As it was lifting off the ground, you can hear a slight hiss sound. Now, as soon as it cleared the ground by about 5 or 10 feet, maybe even less than that, the hissing stopped and the blue glow disappeared. So it lifted off quietly and then it hovered silently, if you want to be specific.
Wow. So then what kind of maneuvers was it doing?
It took off, for that particular time, it took off, moved a little around to the left and right, and then sat back down. The craft itself, they communicated with it with because I saw the guy talking in a regular VHF radio to the person in the craft. And I even saw the frequency that was on the frequency counter of the communication, the transceiver there. But what's weird is he shouldn't be able to communicate with the craft with a radio. The radio wave should bend around the craft. I mean, it shouldn't be possible. Every single thing about the craft and the way they operated didn't make any sense to us. I mean, that's something we talked about for a while after.
Why should the frequency bend around the craft?
Well, you really have to look at the way the gravity wave comes out of the craft. There's the reactor's in the center, and there's a waveguide that goes up to the top. There's actually a small appendage that sticks out of the top of the craft, and it produces a heart-shaped gravitational distortion around the craft. Now, if the craft is sitting in the air and you walk underneath it and look up, you actually cannot see the craft. The light bends around it. You're bending gravity, bends light. It bends radio waves. It shouldn't be possible to communicate with a craft that has an envelope around it that's distorting all forms of energy. But they were apparently in contact with it.
Somehow or another, so through some unexplained way that they didn't bother explaining to you. Mm-hmm. So this thing gets up, it just does some very simple maneuvers, left, right, goes down. And did they discuss this with you? I mean, they said they wanted you to see it.
No, they just wanted, they didn't discuss anything with me. It sat down, we looked around for a bit, and Barry said, let's go back. We went back in the lab. All we got to do was see it. Fast forward to some months later, I did have the test flight schedule of the craft. Now, they had times they had designated high-performance tests. This obviously wasn't one that was a high-performance test. The high-performance test goes above the mountain range, and they do much more radical moves with the thing. Look, this is a prized item, and they're not doing anything like taking it out of the atmosphere or flying around to other countries or anything like that. They just play with this thing right over the test site. But they were doing some radical moves with it. And since I had the test flight schedule, statistically, the amount of traffic in the surrounding areas on the highway was lowest on Wednesdays. And that's why Dennis told us that all the test flights occurred only on Wednesdays, because it'd be the least chance that anyone would see what's going on.
And this was before the government had expanded the forbidden territory around Area 51 and Papoose Lake and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that occurred after my story came out. Then people started going up on the mountaintops and trying to look down into there, and they kind of freaked out and then did the land grab and pushed everybody back. But yeah, I think all of that occurred long after that I came out. As part of the, security clearance process, I gave written permission to have the phones monitored and things of that sort. So they weren't doing any covert stuff. They, with any Q clearance, which is civilian top secret clearance or military top secret clearance, they go talk to friends and, places you've been, make sure you're not connected to foreign countries, but, monitoring your phone is nothing unusual. However, they insisted that, you don't even talk to your loved one, to your partner, to your wife, whatever, about what's going on. So she was essentially in the dark and didn't know the phone was being monitored. Well, part of the security clearance is that not only do you not have any connections to foreign countries and aren't a maniac, but you have to have a stable home life too. Well, she started having an affair with a flight instructor. Now, they were monitoring this on the phone, and they knew it, and I didn't. So they stopped me coming in, and their attitude at the time was, we need to see how this is going to play out, and if Lazar is going to get a little weird or anything. So let's just, hold him off from coming in and, see what happens.
And they explained this to you, what was happening?
Well, after the fact, yeah, because time kind of went on, and there were guys that were following me around, and I started getting a little concerned, going, well, shit, are they booting me out of the project? And if so, they're not just going to let me hang out at home and go get a new job knowing what I know. So as time went on, I started getting a little concerned, and I took my closest friends and just kind of got together, and I said, hey, remember that job I told you about? This is what's going on. And you don't need to take my word for it. Wednesday night, we need to all go out here. I want to show you what's going on. So I took everybody, and we went out to, remember, since I had the test flight schedule, and went outside the base, out into the desert, and so everybody could see, one of the high-performance tests. And, it left quite an imprint on everybody, so they knew I wasn't
And there's videos
crazy.
of these tests, right?
Yeah, but remember, this is it's in the dark in the 80s with a big monster-sized camcorder, and you got, a bright light jumping around. But, we did video of it.
You filmed this test flight, one test flight, and then you get caught.
Actually, it was, I think, the third time, because we went out there the first time. Everybody saw it. Everybody was amazed because it did some radical maneuvers, and everybody had a lot to say about it.
Maneuvers that I've seen the video. It doesn't. I don't think there's something we have now that does that.
No,
in terms of like a human piloted craft. I mean, I don't know, obviously, with the government.
No, it's impossible. Nothing can move like that. And remember, we didn't start filming from the very beginning. We were waiting for something, to happen. The craft took off and then came flying at us, stopped, turned at a right angle, flew back, and then, after it did some, amazing stuff, we like, to get the camera, and then we started filming. So it doesn't have all of it on there; it just has some.
The way I describe it to my friends, and they said, "What does this look like?" I said, "Take a laser pointer, and then have a wall, and then move it around the wall." Like, how it moves around the wall? It doesn't seem like it has anything to do with inertia or physics, or it's not impeded in any way by the atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
You're essentially separated from reality, as crazy as that sounds, with being in case its own gravitational envelope. Inertia is not going to affect it. And, this is how some of those recent sightings with Commander David Fravor, I'm sure you've heard of the Tic Tac UFO. I mean, he describes exactly, the thing operates exactly the way I was describing. That's why he was interested to talk to me. But we saw this, and, on the way home, it's like, hey, we got away with it. We should try it again the next test flight date. So this became a thing to do. And I think it was on the third time that we got caught. I mean, we started becoming a little careless. I think we took a motorhome out there. And, it was like the stupidest thing you could possibly imagine.
Started tailgating.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And
again, you're in your 20s.
Yeah. And, what was funny was we went out there, and my friend Gene Huff and I were leaning on the front of a vehicle. And just for some reason, we just started talking shit. Like, well, I hope they realize that, I don't remember what we were saying, but, that it's something about attacking the base or something along those lines and stealing the craft or something like that.
Something crazy.
And then about 20 feet in front of us, we see a little green light fall on the ground and roll to us. And unbeknownst to us, now it's pitch black, you can't see your hand in front of your face. There were a bunch of guards standing right out there, and they had a night vision scope where they were like from here to the wall looking at us, listening to us, and the guy dropped it, and the scope rolled over to us, and you could see the green screen. We turned the lights on, and all these guys are there. So it was...
Whoa.
Yeah. So we did incredibly stupid stuff and got caught, as we should have.
So when they catch you and they bring you in, then what happens?
Well, I went in for debriefing. The following day, I went to Indian Springs Air Force Base, which is kind of a defunct base that they used to use at the nuclear test site. And this is when they brought out the transcript of the phone call with my wife. And, they sat me down and we said, when we meant to keep the secret, we meant you can't tell your friends, right? And it just being sarcastic and trying to. And then they got real serious. But this is where they, took the transcript out and were reading me what my wife and, our friend were talking about. And I don't know, it was a hard time.
So what happens from there? What do they do with you? Why don't they arrest you?
I don't know. I don't know why. I'm not sure exactly they knew what to do, but they did let me go that night, and I went home. And this is kind of when the most stressful part started.
Because you're realizing that you're being monitored 24/7.
Now I know not only am I being monitored, but now I know I'm in trouble. And it wasn't a short time after that I contacted, at that time, the only investigative reporter I had heard of in Las Vegas was George Knapp. And, told him some of the story because I had no idea what the hell was going to happen at that point.
So George Knapp tries to dissect your story, tries to find holes in it, tells it, puts it online, and makes everybody aware of it, and that's how I found out about it.
Yeah, to make a long story short. Yeah.
What happens, to really make a long story short, what happens from there on? I mean, do they contact you and say, hey, Bob, it's probably a good idea if you shut up?
There were a lot of things that happened at, between that point. I'm leaving out a lot of stuff to fill in the story. We'd have to go back to Los Alamos and well, I really don't want to talk about that. The
top secret weapons stuff that you were working on.
No, I'm talking about the 115.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I have to think about how I'd.
What is the problem with this?
I don't want to get myself into more trouble by admitting something. So I just have to dance around a couple.
You are essentially you're kicked out, right? You're out of this program. You can't work with these crafts anymore. And do they give you any threats? Do they tell you what you have to do from here on out?
Yeah, well, I mean, the way it ended was I told George Knapp all this stuff, and he said, well, let's just get it on tape. Should something happen, at least we have a record of it. And I don't remember what the impetus was, but at some point, George wanted to air it. And he said, you make the call on it. And look, if at any point you change your mind, we won't air it. And it came down to the day where George wants to put it on the 5 o'clock news. He said, hey, this is important stuff. People have to know about it. And I thought it was too. I thought it's kind of a crime. I know you got to keep the technology secret, but you can't not tell everybody that this stuff is going on, that we have, actual hardware from another civilization. It's a big fucking deal, probably the biggest one there ever was. And George said, today's the day we got to put it on the news or something to that effect. And when it came right down to the time to air it, I changed my mind and I said, we're not doing it. And that's what turned into the famous wrestling match between me and George trying to get the tape, but he won because he was a bigger guy.
So you actually physically wrestled?
Well, I think it was more of a pulling match. I don't think we ever hit the ground, but he got the tape, he put it in the player, and boom, 5 o'clock news was on. And then I got a call after that, and they said, it was from Dennis. He said, do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now? And he hung up the phone. That was the last communication I had with him.
And what has happened to you since then?
A lot of people I've known either were audited by the IRS, anybody I know that had clearances that worked in secure programs, had the clearances pulled. One of them, one of mine that Jeremy knows.
He's going on camera with me soon. He'll tell the story now that he's out of work up there.
He was working up at the Tonopah test range, waiting for his clearance to come through, and they pulled that. It became, it's like if they can't get the person that's involved, they just create a problem for everybody that surrounds them. And so, I mean, the way it turns out, it hurt a lot of people's lives that I was connected to. And that's an effective way of shutting someone up. So
Did you feel that by coming forward and going public, they couldn't just snuff you out?
That's what I was told, and George and everybody, said that. It's public. There's, no one will touch you. And I fell for it. And
Do you wish you didn't?
Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes when it's just overstressed and people are camping on your lawn?
Yeah, but this is going to make things worse doing this.
No, this is going to make things better.
That's what I was trying to tell him.
How is this going to make things better?
Well, because you're getting a real chance to explain yourself in a way that's going to make people who not only work in the government, people that are police officers and firefighters and first responders and doctors and scientists, they're going to empathize with what it must be like to be a person like you in your 20s who gets thrust into this world unknowingly and confronted with one of the most, if not the most, important discovery in the history of human beings. The big question, are we alone? It's the number one question. There's two questions, right? What happens when we die, and are we alone? Those are the two big questions.
Right.
And if we're not alone, and someone knows we're not alone, and these some people who know we're not alone are these bungling sort of
even if they weren't,
folks.
It's a crime that they're not telling the rest of us.
But I mean, I don't mean bungling in terms of they're incompetent. I mean, they can't be competent. It seems to me, to what you're describing, that no one can be competent with this technology. Like the Victorian era scholars analyzing some sort of a nuclear reactor. There's no way.
You literally become invincible once you master the technology. You cannot penetrate a field like that. So imagine I know it's all science fiction, but science fiction turns into science fact. If you have real force fields around aircraft and battleships, you win. You win. You can force your will upon anybody. And like I said, there's so much more to the story. When I was first there were Russian scientists at S4. This was early on in the project. At some point, there was intense cooperation
with Russia.
I mean, even exchanging some ideas on nuclear weapons and EMP tests and stuff like things we would never have discussed with them. But at the same time, it was in the late 80s. They were involved and actually in the area at S4. At some point, it wasn't our group, but at some point, there was a big discovery made. And this did not happen when I was there. It happened in between my trips to there. And after that, apparently they decided it was just too cool to share with anybody, and the Russians were never allowed back on the base after that.
But you don't know what that discovery was?
No. Like I said, it wasn't my group. So one of the other groups really found out something. In typical American fashion, it was, all right, this is ours. You guys get the hell out of here.
Was there any inkling that any other government had something similar?
No, nothing that I had heard.
See, that was the thing that always freaked me out, was why, if something was so superior to human beings, it's almost like visiting an ant colony. Like, why would you go to the queen? I don't give a fuck who the queen is. I'm a human. I'm so superior to you ants. I don't care who you have running your hive. I'm just going to study it.
I think it's who got it.
Who got it?
Look at the, rocket technology in Germany.
But they got 9 of them?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me either. So they were either in the same area or, one had clues to where others were. I mean, I don't know. You have to fill that in there, but you're right. I mean, 9 of them, that's a big dig if it was archaeological.
Now, one of the things that's happened to you that has allowed people to discredit you was there's obviously been some sort of an effort to erase your past.
Yeah.
Some sort of an effort to erase your education history, your employment history at Los Alamos. In fact, the only way your employment history was proven at Los Alamos is someone got a directory of the employees from the past and read into it, and you were on that list. So it proved that you worked there even though people were trying to deny it, and they were trying to use that as a way to discredit you, that you never did work at Los Alamos. You weren't really a scientist. What was that like to experience? I mean, of course, we're talking about the 1980s, the 1990s, when you could get away with something like that.
Yeah, obviously there were a lot less records on computers at that time. It was still file cabinets and folders. But that was frightening. That was one of the first things
what happened?
I think George Knapp was the first one that uncovered that. I mean, he saw my birth certificate disappear.
It disappeared.
Yeah,
there was no record of you being.
Yeah, there was no record of that. But the Los Alamos thing really surprised me, and that they were so adamant that no, this guy never worked here. Don't be ridiculous. And George went back and forth, for
I got the letters on the wall. Yeah,
months. I mean, it was ridiculous. But fortunately, somebody came up with a 1982 phone book directory. I mean, and also, originally I told you, when I worked there, I was on the front page of the paper. So they were still able to archive, bring that back from the archives. And, Bob Lazar, a physicist working here at Los Alamos. So there was at least something there. But somehow George came up with the phone directory.
And then Bob took George with cameras into Los Alamos.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we flew out there and I said, look, come on in. I'll show you where I worked. We'll go in. We'll meet people. And George went with me and, filmed
you knew
inside
how to
there.
navigate the place. So you'd obviously been there before.
Met people and, and
Los
so
Alamos
no
was also the place where they had the machine that was able to read the size of your digits.
No, that was Los Alamos. That was S4.
That was S4. And explain that.
So now this was back in the 80s.
And this is back in the 80s where when you discuss this, people are like, this doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
Okay. What was it?
It was a way, this is before fingerprint scanners and, and any high resolution scanner at that time. So what it was a device that had a little picture of a hand on a glass plate with pins in it. So you could jam your hand in there. And there was a bright light above it and a sensor underneath. And when you put your hand in there, the light would turn on and it would measure the bones in your finger because the light shone through your bones. And apparently, the length of the bones in your fingers are extremely unique and easy to measure. And they used that. When you put your hands on there, the light would turn on and your badge would pop out.
There's it right there.
Oh, there it is. That's it. And I tried to describe this to people, and they said, that is the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard. And I said, hey, my badge came out of that thing. I put my hand on it, badge popped out, and that's how I could open the doors and get into S4.
There was that.
Yeah.
There is your education record. That was also, what happened with that?
That disappeared also. That I've never gone anywhere for education. I never attended any classes at Caltech. I never attended anything at MIT.
You did attend classes in those places, though.
I did attend classes in those places.
Do you know anybody that you went to school with?
Yes, I do.
And have they verified that they went to school with you?
Well, I gave Jeremy some names, but the reason I don't say these names publicly is because every single time I mention a name, somebody gets in trouble.
They don't want to be.
Of course.
Yeah, really.
I found them.
If you look at all the information on, concerning my accounts, that's verifiable. It can't possibly be a bullshit story anymore. It's really way past that point.
Yeah.
What really annoys me are the people that think, you guys just came up with the story to make a bunch of money or get a bunch of, attention. And
that's a good point. So please explain that. You've
first
never
of all,
made any
I don't
money
get
off of this.
any money out of this at all. And I didn't even let you guys buy plane tickets for me to come out here or anything. I mean, anytime, like when Jeremy previewed, I guess, the movie up in Michigan. I mean, it brought in like a couple $1,000s. I made sure that $2,000 went to science programs at the local high schools there.
It's like dirty money. He doesn't want to touch it.
I don't take any money from this stuff. And as far as attention, I hate fucking attention. I don't like being on shows. I just want to kind of hide in the corner and do my own thing. So I got enough hugs when I was a kid. Okay, I don't need any attention. So, no, if you think somehow we came up with this thing, then you got to tell me why we did it.
Well, you've done a great job of making sure you have your bases covered in that regard. That you haven't profited off of this, and like you said, that you have donated whatever money that came your way to science programs. It doesn't make any sense any other way. I mean, what I've gotten out of here is what I thought I was going to get out of here when I watched the documentary. That what you're saying makes sense. It doesn't make sense that it's bullshit.
That happened exactly like I said it did, Joe.
I believe you.